Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I would like to warmly welcome you to the celebration of the third annual Books Are the Basis Week festival. This festival is solely dedicated to encouraging devotees in the daily reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. Today, we offer you a presentation by His Grace Dravida Prabhu on the Bhagavad Gita as it is. I hope you will relish this glorification. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we will be releasing new content every day of the festival. Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada's transcendental books.
Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, to the cyclic succession. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about the glories of the Bhagavad Gita as it is. And the first question is, why is the Bhagavad Gita such an essential book for us? So I found a wonderful quote from a lecture Srila Prabhupada gave in 1972, in October of 72 in Vrindavan. And he says this: we should properly utilize the opportunity of human life given by nature, given by God. That is required. So here's the opportunity of hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is there. Krishna is speaking. Not that Krishna is not present. Krishna is present by his words. Krishna is absolute. Krishna is absolute. There is no difference between Krishna and his words. The Bhagavad Gita as it is, they're the words of Krishna. When you read the Bhagavad Gita, you should know that you are talking with Krishna directly. And then I just interject here. This is another quote from Prabhupada. The process of Krishna Bhakti begins with faith. Adav Shraddha. Many of you are familiar with that. This is from the Bhakti-Samhita Sindhu. So Srila Prabhupada says, and this is from another lecture in 73 in Bombay on the first verse of chapter 7. That faith begins with hearing the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is creating that faith personally. He's speaking about himself to create your faith. Krishna says, quote, you are searching after the Supreme? Aham sarvasya bhavavo mattak sarvam bhavartate. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. And in his preface to the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Prabhupada states, our Krishna consciousness movement is genuine, historically authorized, natural, and transcendental due to its being based on the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So then I point out here that in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives the essence of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. These are Sambandha being the relationship between Krishna and this world and us as spirit souls, Abhideya being the practice of devotional service, and Prayojana being the final goal, pure love for Krishna. Lord Chaitanya says in his instructions to Sanat Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that there's no other subjects in all of the Vedas but these three. And so he structures his instruction to Sanat Goswami on these three. So this is also present in the Bhagavad Gita. Another reason why this Bhagavad Gita is such an essential book for us is that many of our previous acharyas wrote commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. Most pertinent, perhaps, as to why the Bhagavad Gita is an essential book for us is Srila Prabhupada's purport to the Bhagavad Gita 4.1. In which he states, as followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we are taught by Srila Prabhupada that we have a twofold mission in life: to become pure devotees of Krishna and to spread Krishna consciousness to the best of our ability for the welfare of all living entities, especially human beings. At the beginning of the purport to 4.1 in Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada explains the essential role that the Bhagavad Gita has in this endeavor. Quote, the kings of all planets are especially meant for the protection of the inhabitants, and therefore the royal order should understand the science of Bhagavad Gita in order to be able to rule the citizens and protect them from material bondage to lust. Human life is meant for cultivation of spiritual knowledge in eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the executive heads of all states and all planets are obliged to impart this lesson to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. In other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness so that the people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life, close quote. So the Bhagavad Gita is meant to guide each of us individually and also human society as a whole. What could be more essential than that? Now, the next topic is Srila Prabhupada's relationship to the Bhagavad Gita. Before meeting Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in 1922, Srila Prabhupada was an ardent follower of Mahatma Gandhi, who preached his own interpretation of the Gita as a treatise on nonviolence. Once becoming a follower of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada renounced his allegiance to Gandhi, but understood the need for a genuine Bhagavad Gita, that is, one that teaches without distortion the essential message of the Gita, namely that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we are all his eternal servants, and that the only way to achieve perfection in life is to recognize this fact and surrender to Krishna. Thus, for the sake of the ignorant people of Kali Yuga, Srila Prabhupada began writing his Bhagavad Gita as it is in India in the 1950s. He gradually produced a large manuscript, but it was stolen. He began again after coming to New York in 1965. Srila Prabhupada began his movement in America by teaching from the Bhagavad Gita. His evening classes were all Bhagavad Gita classes. In his Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other books, Srila Prabhupada frequently quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, as he does in his lectures. Being an intimate association of Lord Krishna, Srila Prabhupada felt the urgency of presenting Krishna's book, the Bhagavad Gita, as it is, so that the world could benefit from it. He well knew that there were literally hundreds of English translations that were not as it is, and that were less than useless, because they distorted Krishna's message and grievously misled the followers or the readers. Srila Prabhupada felt that an important part of his mission was clearing all the misconceptions that had arisen from these bogus Gitas and presenting the book as it is for the real spiritual benefit of the readers. When his unabridged Gita was published in 1972, he felt it was a great victory and felt it even more so as it was distributed by the millions in subsequent years in many languages of the world. Bhagavad Gita as it is played and plays an essential role in spreading Krishna consciousness throughout the world. Now, this next section is a little lengthy. I hope I don't go over time. What are the highlights or the key points of the Bhagavad Gita? And then maybe there are specific sections that you like very much. So I kind of merged those two. So I'm going to go through part of the Gita and show some of the highlights, things that especially, and these are based on mostly on verses that Prabhupada would always often quote from these sections. So in chapter 1, Prabhupada would sometimes quote Dharma Chete, Kuru Chete, Samaveta Yuyutsava, Mamaka Pandavaschava, Kimakurvata Sanjaya. And he would often quote it in order to show how the Battle of Kurukshetra was a historical event, because Kurukshetra is a geographical location in India. He would quote 140 to prove how society becomes 140. This is another verse to prove how society becomes degraded when women are unprotected. So then, chapter 1, as we well know, if you studied Bhagavad Gita even a little bit, is centered on Arjun's lament. Because those on the other side, the battle is about to commence, and he looks over there, and there's his beloved grandfather, Bhishma, and his beloved teacher, Dronacharya, and so many other relatives and friends. And suddenly he has a weakness of heart, and he's put into this by Krishna so that the Gita can be spoken. But it's very interesting because he has this tie of affection for so many of the people, and he expresses that. But then he gives a philosophical reason also. In other words, his intelligence is serving his gut reaction of not wanting to kill especially Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya. So most of the rest of the first chapter is that way. And he seems to be basing everything on the Vedic understanding, but he's not satisfied. And so at the beginning of chapter 2, Krishna chastises him. He says, how is this impotence, this weakness come upon you? Get up and fight. Give up this weakness of heart. And then Arjuna laments, how, better that I go begging rather than kill these worshipful gurus of mine, like that. But then he utters a key verse, 2:7, which is where he gives up his attempting to figure it out. It is paralyzing, and he surrenders to Krishna. And that's this karpan yudosho pahatat svabhava pachamitam dharma sambuddha cheta yakshe eksyanishtitam bruhitan me shishyasteham sharimantam papamana. Now I am confused about my duty and have lost all composure because of my silly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am a disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. And this is such an essential verse because Arjuna is showing us how if we want to come out of this fog of illusion and delusion that we're in Maya, we need to approach a bona fide spiritual master. Arjuna, of course, says Krishna, the original guru there. But someone who's a genuine, pure representative of Krishna, that's the person we need to approach in order to solve our own problems. So there's many other verses in chapter 2. I'm just going to go through a few of them that Srila Prabhupada would often quote. And the reason why I focused on the shlokas is because my experience with the Bhagavad Gita, as I point out later, is that I've been giving class for over 30 years in the evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, and sometimes Thursday, on the Bhagavad Gita. And I remember when I first started reading the Bhagavad Gita and learned a little bit how to chant the Sanskrit, I was enthralled with the language, the rhythm, the power of it. And Srila Prabhupada encouraged us to memorize these verses. So this is one of the ways in which one can really make oneself a vehicle for repeating Krishna's words when you're speaking or when you're enlivening other devotees this way. So I'm going to go through a few of the favorites. These are very well known, but this is what the Bhagavad Gita means to me. So Srila Prabhupada would very often quote 2:13 to prove the transmigration of the soul. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this verse is a wonderful verse by Krishna in which he gives anyone who's a little bit thoughtful an understanding of how transmigration is working, even in this body. And then he simply says, and it continues in the next body. So it's such an important verse for presenting Krishna consciousness to newcomers. Those who are a little philosophical, a little thoughtful, can immediately at least begin to consider that, yeah, transmigration makes a lot of sense. So then what happens is, even though one is a dhira, Krishna says one has to be dhira in the face of this, because you're faced with, as Arjuna will be, the death of this dear grandfather and others. So how to remain equipoised? He says that one is sober is not bewildered by such a change. But, and this is my own word, but even though a dhira, a sober person, should be unbewildered when someone dear to him dies, knowing it is only the body that dies and not the person, the soul, still Krishna recognizes that there will be pain. Just as when devotees leave their bodies, and we've known them, or advanced devotees, even our spiritual master, there's a tremendous sense of loss, even though we know that they're not dead, they're gone on back to Godhead or whatever, but still there's that loss. So that then comes this next verse, Matra Sparshas Tukonteya, Shitos Nasukadukada, Agama Paino Nijas Tam Tatikshwasya Bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Scion of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. And so then I'm not going to go through the whole chapter systematically, but in the next verse he says, if one has to be able to tolerate those in order to be eligible for liberation. If one is allowing the ups and downs of this world to always drag one's mind here and there, then one's not suitable for transcendence. So Prabhupada would often quote many other verses from this chapter describing the indestructibility of the soul, but perhaps the most quoted of all is 220. This is almost the most quoted verse in the whole Gita that Prabhupada did, which dramatically sets out the unchangeability and indestructibility of the soul. Jayate mriyate bhakadachin nayam bhutva bhavitava nabuya ajo nityak shastratoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. For the soul, there is never birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He's unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Then there's a startling comparison in the next verse, 221, of the body to a set of clothes that eventually wears out. Vasanksi jirnani yata vihaya navana gunnati naro parani tata shirinani vihaya jirnyan yangyani sangyani navani dehi. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. At 240, we encounter one of the most encouraging verses in the Gita, especially for neophytes, or those who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti. Neha bhakamanashosti pratyavaya navidyate swapamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bayat. In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Prabhupada would often quote this verse because he's often speaking to newcomers or neophytes, or and it's very encouraging. Unlike anything material that we may succeed in accumulating in this world, which is all taken away at the time of death, whatever we may advance, however we may advance in devotional service, even a little bit, then we begin from that time. It's not lost. It stays with the soul. You're assured of a human body, which is very encouraging. Even a little part. So this, I like to quote this verse in classes I give because I have a lot of newcomers. Then the next verse, 241, holds a special place in Srila Prabhupada's heart because in Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary to this verse, he stresses the essential point that Vyavasayatmaka Buddhi, being resolute in Krishna consciousness, means that one must accept the order of a guru as one's life and soul. Srila Prabhupada saw this injunction as directly pertinent to his always cherishing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's order to preach Krishna consciousness abroad, accepting it as his life and soul. Even though it was so difficult, practically inconceivable, it's an impossible task, but still he stuck with it. And this commentary is part of the reason why. So, Vyavasayatmaka Buddhi Eke Kudanandana, what is it? Oh, Poshak. Okay, so actually I merged it too. So then, okay, did I skip some? Oh, that's it. Okay. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. And I also always personally found text 59 as very inspiring, since anyone who seriously practices Krishna consciousness can experience the potency of the process when one gets the higher taste of Krishna bhakti and can thus give up bad habits that impedes one's progress. Vishayavane vartante niraharasya dehinaha rasabhajam masopyasya padam drisva nivartate. Although the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagement by experiencing the higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. I like to quote this verse in my classes because many of the people are, devotees, and they're experiencing the first stages of bhakti, and they're directly experiencing this. That in their own lives, one may have tried to give up smoking or something or some bad habit, and been frustrated because it's so powerful. But if one really chants Hare Krishna seriously and practice bhakti, then you get the spiritual strength to do that because you're getting the higher taste. So it's a very important verse. And then I've always been enamored, if you will, of this pair of verses, 262 and 263, in which Krishna describes the dramatic description of the jiva's entrapment by Maya and degradation. Dhyayado vishayan pungsa sangasteshu vijayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodo vijayate krodan bhavati sammoha smriti vibhramaha smriti bhangshan buddhinashat pranashyati. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. Now, before we go on, it's interesting, and some of you may know this. Sangat Sanjayate Kama is often quoted alone to explain a different point, and that is that by one's association, one develops one's desires. Because Sangha, it's interesting that Sangha means both association and attachment. And this is illustrative of a certain aspect of Sanskrit, that the same word is used for one thing and what it produces, just like the word gati. Gati we sing every morning both in the Samsara prayers and in the Guru Puja song. And in both of those instances, it means the means to achieve the goal. Yasya prasada nagati kutopi, second line of the last verse of the Guru Vashtaka. So without the mercy of the Guru, there's no hope of advancement to the goal. And then Shri Guru Chadanarati Eseyu Tamagati, which means that, as is translated there, that the attraction to the lotus feet of the Guru is the best means of advancement to the goal, Gati. So similarly, Sangha means association, sadhu sangha, satsanga, but it also means clearly attachment. From meditating on objects, you get attachment. And if you keep meditating and you cultivate that attachment, it turns into lust, very powerful attachment. So it's very interesting. Sangat Sanjayate Kama is used to show association with devotees is so important, because by that association, you develop wholesome desires to practice Krishna consciousness. So now, how do we get out of this? The next verse is so key. This is text, 264. Raga Dveshiva Muktaistu, Vishayanindriyaischaran, Atmavasya Vidayatma Prasadam Adhigachati. So this is how to get the prasadam. But a person free from attachment and aversion and able to control the senses through regulative principles of freedom can obtain complete mercy of the Lord. So Vishayanindriyaischaran, even as the senses are moving about and exposed to the object of the senses, the Vishaya, which are enjoyable, still, one can be free of raga and dvesha. Raga and dvesha are the two opposite sides of the coin of attachment. Raga is very powerful attraction, and dvesha is abhorrence. We don't want either one of those. We want the middle, detachment. Detachment means not averse to the point of being abhorrent, and certainly not attracted. So here he's saying that by practicing the regulative principles of freedom, this is kind of an immortal phrase right in the translation. Atma Vasha Vidhe Atma. Vidhi means instructions. So these are the principles of bhakti by which one can get self-control, Atma Vashaya. And then, even when the senses are exposed to the object of the senses for attraction, they're not attracted because you're self-contained. Then one gets the real mercy of the Lord. Prasadam Adhigachati. So this is a very important verse. Anyway, there's so many others in chapter 2, but I'm going to do a few from chapter 3 now. Some highlights in chapter 3 include this injunction that everything has to be done as a sacrifice for Krishna. Text number 9. Many of you may know this verse. Yagyartat kamano nyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha tadartam karma konteya mukta sangha samachara. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, meaning all your work has to be done as a sacrifice for Vishnu. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. And in his purport, Prabhupada wonderfully sums up the message of this verse. Nothing should be, quote, nothing should be performed for sense gratification, but everything should be done for the satisfaction of Krishna. This practice will not only save one from the reaction of work, but also gradually elevate one to the transcendental loving service of the Lord, which alone can raise one to the kingdom of God. So this is of course the special quality of this Bhagavad Gita, as Prabhupada pointed out when it was in production. The main thing is the purports. The translations are from one to another; they're practically the same. Of course, we cherish his translations, but this is just one of many quotes from the purports, which I didn't have time to really pull out, and it's going to be too lengthy, where Prabhupada just so much crystallizes it, and why it is that so many devotees who had read the Bhagavad Gita before, I read the Bhagavad Gita before, a little penguin edition with no purports. I had no idea what to do from reading that. It was an interesting, ideas and philosophy, but it didn't really help me. But when I read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, so many others said, "Oh, now I understand." I'm sitting here now. Vijay Prabhu, this book distributor, everyone knows him around the world. He's taken up residence here to our great benefit. During the pandemic, he was working else, so he came here and he found that he found this park, this main park here, Balboa Park, is one of the best places he's ever distributed. You can sit there. He can't walk in, he can't stand all day anymore. But he can sit, and he does $400, $500 worth of books every day. And he tells the story about how, he was searching, and when he started reading Prabhupada's book, couldn't put it down, and he finished reading it, and he just was searching for devotees. Where can he was chanting Hare Krishna. So there's other devotees. I think Keshava Bharati Maharaj had that same experience. He read the whole book in 2 days, practically without sleep. So I didn't have quite that experience, but when I read the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that convinced me. And of course, then we had in Brooklyn, we had our Bhagavad Gita classes all the time. So now in another famous verse from the 3rd chapter, the Acharya principle. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So this was so important is so important in the Hare Krishna movement. Is that not only the philosophy is there, but we need good examples of practicing that philosophy, and then we can think it's feasible, because it's inconceivable. That's why people, they hear the 4 regular principles. What was that? I forget the fellow in England who said, "Can you make me a Brahmin?" Not the Marquis of Jetland, maybe. And he said, "Sure, just follow the 4 regs." He said, "Impossible," and it is impossible unless you are able to get a good example and become inspired to practice. So now this next verse, Prabhupada will quote all the time. How the false ego bewilders the soul into thinking he's an independent actor. Text 27. Prakate kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimunatma kartaham ikibanyate. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are actuality carried out by the 3 modes of material nature. And then in text 30, Prabhupada says about this verse clearly indicates the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasyadhyatma cetasa nirashir nivamobudva yudhasabhikatadvura. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claim for proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. So one of the things I want to convey by these quotes, and I'll have a few more, is that when you repeatedly read the Bhagavad Gita, attend Bhagavad Gita class, these verses become your friends. They become old friends, where you can at any time call upon them, discuss them, share them with your God brothers, ladies listening, God sisters, and so forth, and then become enlivened in this way. And this is so essential, and the central practice that we have. Those who are familiar with the Bhagavatam 3rd canto, the teachings of Kapila Dev, right near the beginning, he has something there's 8 verses on the importance of sadhu sangha. Sadhu Sangashtaka, from 3:20 to 27 through 27, 8 verses. And there he has Satam Prasangam, Mamavi Samvido, Bhavanti Ritkana Rasayana Katata Joshanad Asu Abavarga Vartman, Ashvartmani Shradharati Bhaktarana Kumishiti. That by that association with devotees, one hears Krishna Katha. And by hearing and chanting and sharing with your fellow devotees, you develop shraddha, faith, rati, attraction, and bhakti, pure devotion, comes step by step. And then the next verse, he says, this is the easiest process of yoga, meeting and glorifying the Lord. Of course, the pinnacle of all sadhu sangha is Harinam Sankirtan. In other words, singing, you sing, I hear, I sing, you hear, and this way we become absorbed. So this is also very important here. Prabhupada says, how you become free from at the end of the chapters. And then at the end of the chapter, the famous section on the eternal enemy of the conditioned soul, lust, which is never satiated and burns like fire. When lust covers our knowledge and forces us to act against our best interest, that lust covers. The chanting of the holy name cleanses the mirror of the mind, and in the end liberates us from our enemy, lust, and awakens our eternal love for Krishna. So the philosophy is completely consistent. Now, just a few from chapter 4. How much time do I have? We started a little late. Is it okay? So keep going? Okay. Chapter 4 contains the essential verses at the beginning in which Krishna describes how he spoke the Gita to the sun god millions of years ago, and how it came down through the parampara but was lost due to the powerful force of time. But Krishna is renewing this parampara by speaking the Gita to Arjuna. Then Krishna describes the reasons for his own appearance in this world and the benefit of truly understanding his divine birth and pastimes in 3 of the most famous verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Many you'll find practically every Indian body devotee that I encounter here, they immediately, when I start singing Yada Yada Hi Dhamasya, they all know it. They're taught that verse as children. Yada Yada Hi Dhamasya Glanim Bhavati Bharata Abhyutanam Dharmasya Tadatmanam Sujamyaham. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice or descendant of Bharat and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Paratranaya sadhunam vinashaya chadushkritam dharma sangstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. Janma karma tamedim yam nevam yovedi tatpataha. Now, I put in this in truth here because I think it should be in there, and maybe one day it will actually be in the translation. And that is the word tatvataha, which one who knows in truth the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So, and then I always found this, the next verse and its purport, a great source of understanding what blocks acceptance of Krishna consciousness and how to overcome those blockages. This verse is not so famous as quoted, but this purport is just so amazing. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamapashata bhavo jnana tapasa putam bhavam agataha. Being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains how raga, material attachment, bhaya, fear, and krodha, anger, block different categories of people from accepting Krishna consciousness. Too much material attachment blocks the vast majority of people from even being interested in transcendental science. Fear of being persons after liberation leads the Mayavadis to accept impersonal realization as the ultimate truth. And anger at being cheated by so many false philosophies leads one to reject the world as unreal and accept voidness as the ultimate reality. So this is, it's very illustrative. And if you read the purport, Prabhupada encourages us to understand all those 3 and then give them up and surrender to Krishna. And then I say, of course, what devotee could fail to be inspired by text 4.11, the next one, in which Krishna says he responds just in proportion to the devotee's sincere efforts to serve him. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Prita. And we can see this so graphically in the life of great devotees like Srila Prabhupada, that he got on that boat, which is like such an amazing thing. He got on the Jaladuta with no money, no context, didn't know what would happen, almost died from the heart attacks. And yet Krishna reciprocated to him. He came to him in a dream and said, don't worry, I'm taking charge of the boat. And then amazingly, in the month of September, which is the month where all one of the months where all the hurricanes are in the Atlantic, it became very, very peaceful. And they didn't experience any, practically any disturbance the rest of the way. And throughout, Prabhupada was felt that, he was in the hands of Krishna, and that the whole thing was being done and that he was being protected. So he was, perfectly experiencing it and showing that the reality of this verse. And even in our own devotional lives, we can experience when we take an extra step, we make a surrender, that we get more insight into Krishna consciousness, more ability to reject things that are troubling us, and so forth. So then, of course, is the famous 434. The need, Krishna says, we have to surrender to a guru. And this one is now returned to the original translation in text, which there was in 1972. Tadvidi paripatena pariprashnena sevaya vidikshantite jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. And also in that purport, another one of the things that was restored from Prabhupada's original manuscript is that he says, nor by independent study of the scripture can one make advancement. In other words, that wasn't there in the original purport, but it was there in Prabhupada's dictation. That one needs to be under the care of a spiritual master and within, the society, and that's why he's so much stressed to not to try to go off alone and do things on your own. Stick with the society. So then we go to chapter 5, and there's two verses that always struck me as essential for our understanding and practice of Krishna consciousness. They're 21 and 22. They're not so famous, but they just struck me, for instance. Bhaya sparshe sasaktatma vindhyatmani yatsukam sabbrahma yoga yuktatma sukham akshayam ashnate yahi sang sparsheja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate ajantapanta konte yanate tu shramate buddha. So I like to quote the second one first. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. What are those sources of misery? The pleasures. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. And in the purport, you say, well, where am I going to get my pleasure? That's where pleasure comes. It says, no. Ramante yogino anante satyanande chiratmani iti ramapadena suparam brahmamadiyate. That the yogis, including the bhakti yogis, Ramante yogino anante, they enjoy endless happiness, because that part of this verse is so clear. It has a beginning and an end, these pleasures. And the results are you're committing sin, you're getting another birth, you're suffering like anything. But real spiritual pleasure doesn't have a beginning and an end. And therefore, one of the names of the Absolute Truth is Rama, described like that. And further description is in the previous verse. A liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, where he concentrates on the Supreme. And I like to dovetail this verse or explain this verse with that verse, that aphorism Prabhupada would always quote from Vedanta Sutras, Anandamaya Bhyasat, that Krishna, or God, the Absolute Truth, is by nature always filled with ananda. How do we know? By his pastimes. Abhyasat means we can see from the activity. And we're part and parcel of Krishna. So if we can tap into that reservoir of pleasure, we can also become like that. We have this nature. So and how do we tap in? By serving Krishna, by wondering about his pleasure, not wondering about our own. It's paradoxical. If you want to really become blissful, forget all about your bliss. Just think about serving Krishna nicely and pleasing him. Then you'll find yourself in bliss. So that's it. Okay. Now here's in chapter 6, and I think this is the last chapter I go through because it's too much. Chapter 6 contains many valuable instructions. We know it's about dhyana yoga. Krishna gives a summary of the Ashtanga yoga system. But it contains many valuable instructions for us, such as how the mind is our worst enemy and our best friend, depending on whether our mind is absorbed in sense gratification or in Krishna. Many devotees cherish verse 30, since in it, Krishna promises that one is never lost to him when we can see him everywhere. And also the translation is a rhyming couplet, which is, I think, unique in the Bhagavad Gita. So the verses you may notice are Yomam Prashiti Sarvatra, Sarvam Chamai Prashiti, Tasyaham Napanashami Satamene Pranashiti. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. In the purport, we find that the words, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me, mean that the devotee never loses sight of Krishna, and Krishna never loses sight of the devotee. So the idea is that never lost means you're always seeing Krishna everywhere, both in the world and in your heart. And Krishna is always watching out for you. He never loses sight of you. He's taking care of you. So after the Ashtanga yoga system is described, and hearing Arjuna's objection that is too difficult for him to practice, Krishna encourages Arjuna that it is possible by practice, and even if Arjuna fails in this life to complete the course, nothing is lost and he'll be able to continue in the next life. But finally, Arjuna says, well, you know, he's not very attracted to perform this Ashtanga yoga. But finally, Krishna speaks the most encouraging words to Arjuna, that he's already the best of yogis. Yoginam api sarvesham madgiten antaratmana shraddhavam vajate yomam samay yuktatamo mataha. And of all yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So then comes the middle 6 chapters, and there's so many other things that we say about it. So I didn't continue with that, but I continued with other things. Well, there's no time to go through all the highlights of the Bhagavad Gita. There are too many. After all, practically every verse in chapters 7 and 9 are quoted by Prabhupada in his lectures, and they're all worth memorizing for our own enlightenment and preaching. One of the topics that was suggested I might speak about was my relationship to the Bhagavad Gita. Well, as a senior English editor of the Bhagavad Gita, I have spent years going over the text and revising where necessary in consultation with Jayawada Swami. In addition, I've been giving Bhagavad Gita classes in the temple 3 or 4 nights a week since the early 80s. I know Srila Prabhupada wanted that, and I've tried to maintain his standard program. So I feel that the Bhagavad Gita as it is a tremendous source of knowledge and inspiration, and I try to share its wisdom with devotees as much as possible. And then another thing you suggested was, how is the Bhagavad Gita relevant to our lives today as devotees? So, I mean, it's so relevant. It's almost like, how can you describe it? Because as Prabhupada knew very well, and as all our acharyas have known, that this is a book that gives the essence of the process of devotional service and the philosophy, as I said, Sambandha Prayojana, in a summary form. Obviously, it's short, and it's expanded upon in the Bhagavatam, and CC is postgraduate. But if the people in general are to take up devotional service, they need to understand the principles of the Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada knew that, and he explained them in such a way that the modern readers could understand. Now, of course, it's not an easy book to understand. There's so many Sanskrit quotes, but it's a central book for every devotee to study regularly. And my experience is memorizing these verses, and I memorized a couple of chapters over the years. It's been a tremendous source of encouragement, enlivenment, and teaching, making the philosophy fresh in my mind. So that I encourage everyone to do. In the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives the most confidential knowledge in 2 verses, which summarize the whole message of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Manmanabhava madbhakto madhyajim nam namaskuru mame vaishasi satyam te pratijane priyosime, which is practically an exact quote from the end of chapter 9. And then he says, Sarva dharmam parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasyami manashuchaha. I've rendered these verses into a little poem. Just think of me, become devoted, worship me, and bow down low. You'll come to me, dear friend. I promise you this boon I shall bestow. Completely shun all dharmas and surrender only unto me. Your sins I'll nullify, O Arjuna. From anxiety be free. So that's as much as I had prepared. But just one note on that last verse, because he does say give up all dharmas there. But the whole beginning of the Bhagavad Gita is all because Arjuna was bewildered about his dharma. I am samudha chetak, dharma samudha chetak, he says in 2.7. Yakshreyak sanishchitam bruhitam me. Please tell me for certain what is best for me. In other words, clearing up dharma. In chapter 4, Krishna says, whenever and wherever there's discrepancy in dharma, I appear in order to reestablish dharma. So what does he say at the end there? Give up all them. So the idea is that the dharmas all culminate in surrender to Krishna and practice of pure devotional service. We learn in the second chapter of first canto, right? The question of the sages is, what is that dharma that can be practiced to completely satisfy the soul? So Sutta Goswami answers, Savai Pangsang Paro Dharmo Yato Bhakti Hokshaje Ahaitukya Patayada Yatma Suprasidati. So this is very important, that dharma, that the only dharma that can truly satisfy the soul is the one that engenders devotional service to Adhokshaja, which is an interesting name for Krishna. It's definitely not a name that any of the Brajbasis would chant in Goloka Vrindavan. But it means one who is transcendental, beyond the reach of the senses and mind. So, and that's the state that we begin in. We have some preliminary faith that there is a transcendence, there is a God, there is something, some absolute truth that I want to know, but we have no idea what it is. So, but that dharma that engenders, what is it? Devotional service, which is characterized as the haituki and apardiyata. A haituki means with no material motivation, and apardiyata means nothing can stop it. In other words, unimpeded. That alone can fully satisfy the self. So in those two verses at the end of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna summarizes that. What he says before, is you may remember, is that Mami Parta Vipashati Episu Papayoni is Triyo Vaishyatashu Tepiyanti Padam Gatim. That's text 32, which now, by the way, and this is, we've restored Prabhupada's original translation, which all these years we've had, O son of Pritha, those who take shelter of me, a shelter in me, though they be of lower birth, that is, women, Vaishyas, merchants, and Shudras, can attain the supreme destination. So what that does is put women, Vaishyas, and Shudras within the category of lower birth. And if you look in the word by words, this is papayoni. Papayoni is sinful birth, you know. So here in his translation, Prabhupada did not do that when he dictated this. And if you look at, I can share this with everybody and you can send it around. He did not present it this way. This translation was more or less brought in from another source. And in the purport, Prabhupada has a sentence in there which further reiterates that it's these four categories: those of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, and Shudras. So that's going to, in Bhagavad Gita to come, I think we sent that correction up to the corrections conference. But so this is, again, going back to my activity, my relationship to Bhagavad Gita. Working as an editor, we encounter these things, and these changes are made, with consultation. There's not this, we don't do anything out of order. But these four verses go together. The next verse, which I don't know the Sanskrit, but Kim Puna Brahmana Punya, what to speak of the Brahmins and the devotees, they're certainly going back to God. What Krishna says is that even people, and it includes Papayoni, may be very sinful. In the commentary by Baladev Vijayabhushan, which Prabhupada relied on, but he doesn't quote in his purport. And he quotes this verse, maybe Kirata Hunanda Pulinda Pukasha Abir Shimba Yavanaka Shadya Yenyata Papa Yada Pashayasha Sunjanti Tasmai Prabhu Vishnaven. That even the outcasts, completely out of the Vedic culture, who are totally sinful, but they take shelter of someone who is taken shelter of Vishnu, they become purified and they can also come to you. So that's the point, and that opens up the whole preaching of Lord Chaitanya. Jagai Madai, and most sinful of the sinful can be purified by this process. So then the question arises, well, okay, what is that process of surrender? Those who are practicing this and come to the point of purely practicing that will come to me. You will regain your relation to me, friendship. I am your friend. You will certainly come to me. Don't worry about anything else. Sarva dharma parijaja. If you do that, then you've already achieved the end of all Dharma, because Dharma really brings you to a certain point. In other words, it's a process by which you regain your original nature, because Dharma means that which is inherent to you, a function. And so they're not practicing Dharma in Goloka Vrindavan. They're just dancing with Krishna, engaging all these, So that's what you Sarva Dharma Parityajya. But in any case, that's my take on the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, we should see it as a great friend, really. And Prabhupada so wonderfully in that introduction, that introduction itself is a wonderful literary construction. And he ends it with these verses from the Gita Mahatmya, which is so enlivening. Gita Upanishad, what is it? Sarva Upanishad Gita. I forget how the Sanskrit goes, but he said the Upanishads is a great cow, and Krishna is milking the cow, and the milk, the essence of the Upanishads is the Bhagavad Gita, which Arjun is the calf drinking, and we can also drink, let's say, leftover milk. There's plenty of milk for us. And then the last one, again, I haven't memorized these. Eko Shastram, let there be one Shastra, let there be one, the Gita, one activity, service to Krishna, one song, name of the Lord, So these are, the Gita is foundational for our devotional life. And so many our acharyas have all written, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and Baladev Vijabhushan wrote this wonderful commentary which Srila Prabhupada relied on. And the book is quoted in the purports, but also in the text of the CC, and it's quoted by Krishna's Kaviraj and Lord Chaitanya. So it's a foundational book, and it's a wonderful. Back to my original quote here from Prabhupada said, "You're speaking. You should know that you're speaking directly with Krishna. Krishna speaking directly to you when you read the Bhagavad Gita. You should feel like that, and it's a great solace for devotees, inspiration, source of knowledge. And if we have the facility to memorize, prominent shlokas that Prabhupada would quote and use them in our preaching, because it adds a lot of authority, weight to your presentation." Thank you for letting me speak on the Bhagavad Gita, which has been, and I encourage anybody who have the facility to memorize the Gita, share, it's such a wonderful thing. So much of my early days, because we on the ashram in Brooklyn, everyone had these little mantra cards, we're all memorizing, little index cards. And there's a Prabhu, what is that verse where Krishna describes the process of transmigration? Oh, I know that one. I know. Oh, yeah. In this way, you enliven each other in devotional service. Isn't that in the Gita itself? Oh, it wouldn't be complete unless I gave the 4 essential verses. Aham savasya bhavavo mattak sarvam bhavaktate timatbhavajate mamura bhava samandvita. I am the source of all beings, all worlds. From me, everything emanates. The wise who understand this worship me with all their hearts. And then he described, well, how do they worship me? Matchittam mankata prana bodhayantak parasparam katayantastamam nityam tushyanti chadamandicha. They put the devotees, my devotees think of me, matchitta, mankata prana, their lives are devoted to me. And they meet with each other and they discuss me. And in this way, tushyanti chadamandicha. They become very satisfied and enjoy spiritual pleasure. This is how we enjoy Krishna consciousness. And then he says, Tesham satadi yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dhammi buddhi yogam tam yena mama priyantite. For those, and I always think that those who are worshiping me in this way and who are constantly engaged with loving devotion, satadi yuktanam bhajatam priti, I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. And so many devotees have experienced that. I was going here and there, but then when I started chanting Hare Krishna, someone I felt I should go to the temple, or I read Bhagavad Gita and Krishna gave us the inspiration, go to the temple, get the association. You can feel that Krishna does guide you. And finally, that wonderful meditation, out of compassion for them. Now, this anukampa word, because I dabble in Sanskrit. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I've been studying verses for so long. So what is kampa? Kampa is one of the ecstatic symptoms, right? Trembling, So anukampa means trembling, or it means empathy. In other words, I'm feeling what you're feeling, And there's my devotee is suffering. Let me enlighten them. So out of mercy, anukamba is a great word for mercy, compassion. I destroy the darkness in their hearts with the shining lamp of knowledge. So these 4 verses, essential verses, everything is there. Sambandha videya prayojana. The sambandha is understanding, Krishna is the origin of everything, all these energies, And then in that same verse, you take up the avideya. Those who understand it, the wise, they worship me with all their hearts. And what's the result? Progressive realization. I'm inspiring them. And then out of compassion for them, they feel my presence, So Bhagavad Gita is so wonderful.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama